Hello, and welcome to the Veterans Ascend weekly podcast. Today is September 11th. It's been 18 years since that awful day in the history of our country. I worked in New Jersey at the time, and I had just been in the North Tower in May that year visiting a client. The client was Cantor Fitzgerald, and too many of their staff died on that day. My husband's cousin also died in the second tower, so like a lot of people, that day is very personal to me. With memories of their own from that day, we are honored to talk with Andrea Francen and Brian Hoops on the show today. Andrea is an Air Force veteran and serves as the diversity military recruiter for U.S. Bank. Brian is an Army veteran and still serves in the Ohio National Guard. He is a marketing project manager at U.S. Bank. Andrea and Brian, thank you for your time today. We really appreciate you being on. We'll start with Brian. So Brian, please tell us your 9/11 story, memory, and the impact on your life.
So I guess I want to first and foremost say, unlike most people that lived in that area, I can't really say that I didn't lose any family members. I didn't lose any friends. But I can pretty vividly remember the exact moment when 9/11 occurred. I was in my 7th grade English class when my math teacher, Mr. Purcell, opened the door and called to the hallway my English teacher, Mr. Slomsky. He walked back into the classroom and he asked if anyone had any family or friends in New York City at the time. And when no one responded, he turned on the TV in the classroom and he told us that there had been an attack on the World Trade Centers. Again, I was 13 years old and living in Ohio, and like my first thoughts were kind of confusion because I just didn't really understand like what the World Trade Centers were and what the full impact that was going to have. And as I had mentioned before, I didn't have any friends or family that were immediately impacted by the events that day when it occurred. But as more and more details went throughout the day, and we kind of understood that this was an attack on the United States of America, you know, even at 13 years old, not being very geopolitically read, I kind of understood that the United States is on a path to war. I personally had, you know, my grandfather, several great uncles that served during World War II. I had uncles that served in Vietnam. So I think throughout my childhood, I kind of had that like sense of like, perhaps one day I have to follow in their footsteps and join, you know, some branch of the service and serve my country. I think the thing that's unique about my generation is, you know, growing up, you know, we didn't have these really like prolonged wars. You know, I think I really remembered the most like the Gulf War. And like I said, when 9/11 happened, I was only 13. So that wasn't, I just knew it was like a very short war. And I also thought about like the intervention in Somalia, which is also a very short conflict. So I think my reaction to 9/11 at the time was kind of like I don't want to say like uber patriotic, but there was like that one part of me that was like, you know, we have to go and fight back. And like in my mind, I was like, I'm only 13. I was like, and this war is going to be over in like 20 days. And if you would have told me back then, like, Brian, in 7 years you're going to be in Afghanistan, I probably would have thought you were the craziest person on this planet. Like I said, I didn't lose anyone personally, but through my experiences in joining the Army, I had a lot of friends and still do who lived in New York City at that time. And, you know, it was kind of a topic of taboo that you didn't really bring up because you could kind of tell it impacted all of the entire city. And to a degree, most Americans, to some extent or another, just kind of the feeling that, you know, we had been attacked on our own home front. And I think that's kind of the impact that it made on my life.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian, for sharing that. And you're right. I think everyone, regardless of where you are or were at that time, will remember that day in some fashion. So thank you again for your military service. Tell us about your military background and your transition and now your current role with U.S. Bank.
Yeah, so kind of going off, you know, what I was saying before, you know, 13 post 9/11, I didn't think, you know, the war would go on as long as it did. But I was about 5 months out of high school, and this is about 2007. So at around the age of 19, I had thought about joining the Army out of high school. Didn't really have any plans on what to do or anything like that. I think there's, you know, it's not like for that past like 6 years post 9/11, it wasn't like that was like stewing in me the entire time. Like, I mean, I ultimately ended up joining for many different reasons, I saw it as an opportunity for a better life, the kind of adventurous feeling, and just to generally get out of suburban Southwest Ohio for a few years. So I did my basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I started as field artillery fire direction, and then I changed my MOS eventually to 13th Box Forward Observer. I was stationed with 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain Division out of Fort Drum, New York. I deployed twice to Afghanistan, 2009 to the Eastern Wardak Province, and again in 2011 to the Southern Kandahar Province. And I'd say to go into my transition, I did about little under 5 years on active duty, probably like 4.5, a little under 5 on active service. And I think one of the biggest reasons that joining the military was so appealing to me was, obviously part of it was the benefits. There's no one reason anyone ever joins the military. It's always a plethora of things. But ultimately, I did my time on active duty, and I wanted to go ahead and, start going to college. To, I guess, really describe a large overview of my, military transition, mine was probably a lot easier than some of my other Army buddies and, other friends of mine who were in the military that I got out. So when I first exited the service, I ended up enrolling in the University of Cincinnati and got my bachelor's degree eventually in marketing. And educationally now, I'm actually working on my master's in business intelligence at Xavier University here in Cincinnati, Ohio. During my undergraduate time and kind of in my transitional period, I worked kind of just different odd jobs all the way from server bartender, and then I worked for some time as a private detective. As you had mentioned earlier, Robyn, I did ultimately decide upon exiting active service to go immediately in to the Ohio Army National Guard. One of the reasons why I did that was just because I thought it would help ease the transition by keeping some of those components of military life that I'd become accustomed to. Generally, how I found U.S. Bank, when I was finishing my undergraduate degree, I went to a Cincinnati area veterans career fair, and there were members of our one of our business resource groups called Proud to Serve, which is specifically tailored towards veterans. And if you've ever been to a veteran career fair, it's been a very long time since I've been, but they're usually pretty painful to go to. Some recruiters I don't think are as well versed in the military lingo, and I think also there's kind of that barrier that a lot of service members have in translating their skills and what they did while they were in the service to really appeal to recruiters. But I think one of the cool things was the two men that were the representatives of the Proud to Serve group. They didn't really try to ask me my career interest or anything like that. They were just trying to get to know me. They were like, yeah, what did you do when you were in the Army? And both the guys, Chip and Vince, they're like, oh yeah, we were both in the Army as well. Oh, where are you stationed at? And they sat there and just got to know me, and they gave me their cards, and they took my information. A few days later, I think it was Vince who gave me a call, and he was just like, yeah, if you're still interested in career opportunities, I can set you up with one of the recruiters here at U.S. Bank, and maybe you guys can explore your options. And I mean, long story short, here I am now. I work currently. My role is, as you mentioned, Robyn, as a marketing project manager with our consumer line marketing team. I guess the highest level to describe my role, amongst other duties and tasks, is to assist in the planning and execution of different marketing campaigns from start to finish, and assisting in a look back and see how they performed. I'm currently currently working with our project management office, but also working with our customer centricity and our retail payment card services team.
That's awesome. And so, yeah, Brian, you mentioned a couple of things I'd like to touch on for a second. Job fairs that veterans go to, you're right. They're sometimes not as inspirational as they could be, and not as lucrative, I think, the ROI for companies. So it's wonderful to hear that your experience with U.S. Bank is was just so terrific, because I'd love to share that out. And every time US Bank is attending, we'll make sure our veterans are aware and getting out there and meeting those folks. So thank you for that. You also touched on veterans not understanding their skills. And so that's one of the things and the reasons we created Veterans Ascend, is to help the veterans understand what skills they bring to the table, be able to start to tell their story around those skills, be confident in them. And then as we connect them to great employers like US Bank, help the employers understand what skills a veteran brings to the table, so there's no misunderstanding about infantry versus gunner's mate in the Navy versus some of the other roles that may not have traditional title comparisons in the civilian community. So that's awesome to hear that. So tell us what your best piece of advice for a transitioning service member or veteran would be.
I ended up writing down a few different bullet points, and I'm not going to go through all of these just because, like, I honestly could have literally just spoken this entire time on, like, just pieces of advice now that I can kind of, like, look back. But I'm going to touch on some of the probably, like, just maybe like one or two, just to give highlights. The biggest one for me was plan early. I just remember being on active duty, and when guys were preparing to ETS like 2 weeks out, like I'd go up and like talk to my buddy and be like, yeah, so what do you plan on doing when you get home? And they would just be like, I don't know, just get a job or go to school or something. And I mean, you know, they're doing well off now, but I've spoke with them over the years, and you can tell that they were kind of like unprepared for like what they were about to face. So, I mean, probably my biggest piece of advice, I started planning my ETS about a year and a half out, because I was deployed for about a year. So I wanted to kind of spend 6 months before that to start like really hammering the details out to my plan. So I wanted to go to college. So what I started doing was reaching out to like different campus recruiters and just various academic counselors, and just limiting down like what I wanted to major in and what schools I wanted to go to. I think a lot of campuses now have a lot better resources equipped to help with veterans kind of understand like their benefits, as well as like helping them kind of figure out like what they want to do in life. But that's the route that I went. I mean, I always recommend to friends of mine who are like exiting out of the service, like usually their first thing they want to do is go to college. And I'm like, you know, there's trade school, there's thousands of other things you want to do, but just think about what careers you ultimately want to go to. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, but in terms of translation of skills, the one thing that other big piece of advice I'm going to give veterans is to make sure to reach out to like nonprofit groups, you know, Veterans Ascend as your group. And there's a bunch of other different resources that they can just Google and look up. I think like Hire Heroes, DAB, like there's some organizations that will like just write their resume for them, or at least give them a good jumping off point. But kind of with that, in terms of looking for a career, make sure to tailor your resume around the position you want. You shouldn't just have you shouldn't go into the mindset thinking that your resume is a one size fits all deal. You kind of have to, you know, you kind of have to make your resume appealing to the specific position that you want. And I guess like my final like big bullet point that I'll touch on, because I don't want to take up too much time, is for, you know, my fellow service members to remember that finding a job is a job in itself. I know too well how frustrating it is to spend time interviewing, rewriting your resume, looking at job descriptions, the whole 9 yards. Just understand that it's going to be patient. And one thing that I learned, you know, in the civilian world, they kind of run on a different time clock than we're used to in the military. So I think those are probably like, I could keep going on, but I think those are probably the biggest touch points that I can lend.
Awesome. Those are great points, Brian. I think what I would take away, the major point there is to really use the resources available to you. And there are so many, as you pointed out, so many great resources out there. You know, LinkedIn is a great tool to find people that work at a company that you're interested in, find veterans such as yourself and Andrea that work at a company that you're interested in. So Great advice. So thank you very much, Brian. We appreciate all that insight and hearing your story. Now let's hear from Andrea. So Andrea, please tell us your 9/11 story, memory, and the impact on your life.
Yeah, so very similar to Brian's story that he shared. I actually was also in the 7th grade and in math class, so I chuckle a little to myself. But I was pretty naive, did not really understand what was going on. I remember the moment, but I also remember getting home that night and just kind of, asking my mom and dad, like, what does this even really mean? Just very confusing. And it wasn't an event that pointed me to the military immediately. And to be honest, military wasn't anything I ever thought I would do. If you had asked me even a couple of years into high school, I still wasn't really considering the military. But I had my oldest sister. Neither of our parents served, but I had my oldest sister, 5 years older than me, wanted to serve and joined Air Force ROTC in college. Had a very, very positive experience, and really started to just talk to my other sister and I about it, encouraging us to consider it as an opportunity. We're pretty similar in personalities, pretty similar strengths. And she used to always tell me, of the three of us, I think you'd be the best at it. I think you'd be the most successful. And so I was pretty close-minded to it. It was very scary at that time, seeing people deploy and lives being lost. So that was really intimidating to me. But when it came down to it, I found myself being really prideful in anything, especially for the Air Force, because that's where she was serving. I had so much pride around it. And I remember thinking, if I'm this proud of my sister being in the Air Force, I wonder what I could do in the Air Force. And so I decided to give it a chance. I joined Air Force ROTC right out of high school when I started at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. And they have a opportunity where you can do the program for a year, and if you don't like it, you can walk away. And so I thought, well, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to give it a try, and fell in love with it. And it totally just changed and shaped my entire college experience and then my professional experience up to this point. So it was not a decision I could have guessed I would make as a young person when 9/11 happened, but definitely one that I'm grateful I landed where I landed. So
That's great. It's good to hear the perspective of, you and Brian were both so young when 9/11 happened, and it's just a different perspective, but how it, probably planted a bit of a seed as you made the decision, both of you, to join the military, then later in life, that I think would have had some sort of memory in your mind from that. So awesome. So tell us a little bit more about your military background, what you did in the Air Force, and then your transition, and now your current role with U.S. Bank.
Sure. So I joined active duty Air Force right out of college then. I served in Charleston, South Carolina as an aircraft maintenance officer. I had really great experience there. Pretty hard work, long hours. And so I decided I wanted to look at making a move into an instructor position back home. So I actually returned to St. Paul and worked as an ROTC instructor and a recruiter. So that was a really unique opportunity to be local and on active duty, and really doing a different role, completely different role outside of aircraft maintenance. But I credit that decision and that move in large part to my opportunities that I then had with U.S. Bank, moving into a recruiter position, because I was really able to leverage, although military recruiting is very different than corporate recruiting, I could really use that experience and what I had learned, with candidate interactions and interviewing and some of those skill sets to get a position that I'm in currently. So the way I even learned about U.S. Bank was because I was on the campus. We had a veteran services center, and they would sometimes invite the active duty staff to their events, and they were hosting, the campus recruiting team for U.S. Bank was hosting an event on campus for our veteran students. And I knew I was transitioning in a couple of months, and so I was kind of at the point where I was wanting to just learn and grow as much as I could and say yes to kind of all the opportunities that were available to me. And so I took took time out of my lunch hour and went over to that event to hear them, hear what they had to say. And I went into it thinking, if I learn one thing that's going to help me in my transition, it's worth my time. But little did I know it would lead to a job. So I stayed after and asked some questions. And the next thing I knew, the recruiter was asking for me to send her my resume. And then within I think it was just 2 weeks or less, I was connected with the hiring manager who eventually hired me for this position as the diversity and military recruiter.
Wonderful. That's awesome. So that's a great segue. So highlight one of the best programs at US Bank related to veterans. I know Proud to Serve is probably the best topic you can talk about, but I'm looking forward to hearing about that. So kind of tell us about US Bank's programs for military.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot, but I of course am partial to the role that I get to play. So I'm one of the military recruiters, and was selected for this position to help ensure future veterans also get an opportunity to be employed by US Bank. So some of the things that Brian talked about around Proud to Serve tied directly into kind of what we're doing, what he experienced at the career fair, ties to some of the opportunities I get to do in this position. So I get to conduct training at least annually, if not biannually, or even just one-off conversations with other recruiters in the company just to educate them on our military candidates and our military, current employees, but primarily the candidates. I get to connect with veterans of all sorts of various backgrounds, and I really get to be consultative and have conversations around their skill sets and offering some tips and tricks or answering questions specifically about a role that they're looking at. So it's unique in the sense that I kind of get to be like their inside go-to person and help them as they navigate US Bank, position descriptions and salary ranges and things like that. But of course, like you mentioned, our Proud to Serve organization does wonderful things, within the company as well. We lean on them a lot from the recruiting perspective. So we have monthly conversations around, ways that we can partner together to increase our veteran candidate pool and then eventually, veteran employees. We do have veteran-focused onboarding. We have extensive executive leadership support through our recognition for Memorial Day and our Veterans Day events. Our CEO sends personal notes to our deployed employees and service members. We have special accommodations for leave benefits, pay differential for National Guard and Reserve employees, employee engagement through a number of events throughout the year. Like I mentioned, Veterans Day event is our largest event of the year. And then all sorts of products and services specific to our military customers, as well as community outreach to include home and car donations to veterans. So last fall, that was probably one of the coolest things I got to do really early with the company was actually go to a home donation to a veteran that was here local in Minnesota. So since 2013, US Bank has completed 17 donations to veterans, home donations to veterans, and 6 vehicle donations since March of 2018. So those are just some really cool programs that we have in place to not only get veterans to be a part of our company as employees and customers, but also just to serve the veterans in the communities that we live and work in.
That's wonderful. Well, wow, that is a lot, and it's just thrills me to hear all of that because US Bank is certainly ahead of the curve when it comes to all of those programs. So I can't work there, but I do have a US Bank credit card, so I'm proud to say I can contribute in some way to all those great programs. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Very good. So Andrea, tell us your best piece of advice for a transitioning service member or veteran, and in particular, if they don't want to do what they did in the military, because it sounds like you had somewhat of a transition from being right in what you did in the military to what you're doing now. So tell us what your best piece of advice would be.
I think for me, I used to say like I just got really lucky and things just fell into place. But more recently, as I've been reflecting, I'm a little over a year out of my transition already, and I've really been kind of self-reflecting lately, and I kind of had this realization that, you know, maybe I got lucky with timing for that position, but if I hadn't been ready, like Brian said, if I hadn't had my resume ready, you know, stripped of all the military jargon and the acronyms, and if I hadn't showcased my skill set, you know, very well as a recruiter and leaned on my transferable skills, if I hadn't done some informational interviews to just learn more about opportunities outside of the military, which in turn helps me practice talking about myself and my experiences, if I hadn't practiced interviewing, you know, conversations with my husband and just people in my family and my professional network as well, you know, if I wasn't able to talk about my biggest accomplishments, the timing wouldn't have mattered. so it paired with timing, you know, I was ready to have those conversations. So I think that's the biggest thing, like Brian said, is you do have to start early, and you can't just sit around and expect somebody else to do it for you. So while I'm here in this company to help veterans, we still put a lot back on the candidates as far as, you know, asking the tough questions, being in the job descriptions, you know, updating their resumes. It still is their responsibility to do what they need to do to set themselves up for success to get that position. I did use a lot of resources in the local community. The state of Minnesota has a Employment Ready Veteran Seminar, so I took that in addition to the TAPS class, which was great timing to focus on networking, resume writing, how to negotiate salary. So kind of just went above and beyond the transition class that's mandatory for all those active duty members. And I always kind of forced myself to say yes to things. So I am somewhat of an introvert, so this really had to push me out of my comfort zone. Even going to that lunch, I remember being like, I don't really know if I'm going to get anything out of this, but I said yes, I gave it a shot. If people gave me advice, I tried my best to always, you know, do what I could to follow their advice and circle back with them and have conversations around that to see if they had any other suggestions. But really being honest with yourself, examining your skill set, and trying to understand how it would fit into a company that isn't the military is what's important if you're, you know, not wanting to do exactly what you wanted to do in the military. So self-reflecting, considering your goals, thinking long-term, and knowing that sometimes it's going to take steps. You know, you're not going to necessarily get your dream job, you know, first position out of the service. And so when I was in my transition class, they really had us think about 3 priorities. They had us think about salary, location, and the type of work that you're going to do. And they kind of described it as a triangle. You're not going to get, potentially, you might not get all 3 points of the triangle in your first position or maybe even your second position. But what are the priorities, you know, maybe of those 3, or maybe there's another one for you, but of those 3 that you're willing to sacrifice? Is it location this time? Is it salary? Is it the type of work you're going to do? And then being realistic with kind of what you can make work for your family in your scenario, and then making your decisions from there. So I really had to kind of go back to that, you know, even accepting the offer with US Bank, you know, I had to go back to that salary, location, and the type of work, because I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so I had to kind of say, well, 2 of the 3 are great, and 1 I'm not so sure on, but I'm going to take a chance, and I'm going to do my best when I get there, and consider it, you know, a positive step in my professional career path.
Awesome. And it sounds like it's worked out for both you and Brian quite well. So if another veteran is interested in working for US Bank, what would you recommend to put their best foot forward?
Absolutely. So Brian kind of hit the nail on the head with tailoring your resume. Our candidates have to meet our basic qualifications. When they look at a position description, you know, go to those basic qualifications. Unfortunately, if you don't meet those and you can't sell your skill set to meet them, you know, we're not going to be able to move you forward as one of our competitive top candidates. If you meet the basic qualifications, awesome. Make sure you showcase that on your resume, and then go down to the preferred skills and experience and showcase that skill set as well. So really leaning on the position description side by side to your resume, especially as you're translating. You know, the position description has corporate language in there that we're looking for. And so Google search, research, informational interviews, if you fit the corporate language because of what you did in the military, use the corporate language, and then just know when you get asked about it, how to tell your story about your military experience that does fit the corporate language. That is a big part of informational interviews, and one reason I would really recommend them is because you just don't know. I thought we had a lot of acronyms in the military. We do. I couldn't believe how many acronyms U.S. Bank has. I thought only the military had acronyms. And so I think the more you can have those conversations with some companies that you're interested in, the more confident you're going to be in translating your skill set to fit the language that they know. And they should be trying to meet you in the middle as well, as far as the training that they get to understand the military candidate. And that's what we do at U.S. Bank. So take out that military jargon, use the position description to translate your skills and match corporate language. Don't expect somebody else to find you your dream job, but definitely reach out to those in the company that, like myself, are put in positions to help veterans, or just reach out to make those connections and have those informational interviews and network. And ultimately be patient in the process. Like Brian said, it does take a lot of time. And you need to find the right team, the right role, the right company. And we hope that's U.S. Bank, but of course we want people to land where it's a good fit for them, and a good professional career move, and that they're happy with.
Excellent. Wonderful advice. So on point. Thank you so much. So Andrea and Brian, first, thank you for your service. Thank you for continuing to serve our country and our veteran community. We appreciate you sharing these great insights today and your stories. We will never forget 9/11. So listeners, for more information on U.S. Bank, in particular their Proud to Serve program, please visit their website at www.proudtoserve.usbank.com. And for more information on Veterans Ascend or to sign up today, please visit our website at www.veteransascend.com. Thank you, everyone, and have a blessed day.